Alex, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. It's nice. You came on my podcast, and I'm coming on yours. Very different. We don't have as many challenges, perhaps. Here, you're in a lovely home, nice setting. You don't have to worry about thunder, lightning, snow.
This is my first recording in the new house, so it's quite special. But also, I feel more relaxed having you come in because we've met already. Sometimes, like the first thing when you haven't met the person before is always a little bit
Trying to work out people's energy and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Oh, we were just in like, let's have a look at the kitchen then, have a nose around, seeing your fridge magnets and your affirmations. You've got great affirmations. You've got great affirmations. Am I outing you by your affirmations?
Let's not repeat them. They're my boyfriend's affirmations, I promise.
They're good affirmations. Positive things on there.
Positive things. But anyway, for the audience that might not be familiar with your work, would you be able to explain a little bit about who you are and the work that you do?
Sure. My name is Alex George. Grew up in West Wales, in the countryside, which is a long way away. I've lost a lot of the accent. Went to uni at Exeter and Plymouth doing medicine, so I studied at medical school. Came to London actually in 2014-15, became a doctor. Went on a little show called Love Island, which people know from years ago, which has been a long time ago. It's been like 6 years now, so it feels a very long time. And then since then, I guess, I had all these followers. So I went back to Lewisham Hospital, worked throughout the pandemic, and I guess my passion's always really been about health, but particularly mental health stuff. So I had some struggles at university myself. I also just feel like we don't talk about the positive sides of mental health tools, like mental fitness and things. So that was a big thing for me. And I just worked throughout the pandemic, brought content to different places. I've done, I've written some books, got some documentaries and stuff that I've done. But I love what I do. I'm very fortunate. There's lots of challenges. We're in a weird world, aren't we? Like with this kind of creating of content and /influencing / whatever we do.
And because there's no set path, because it's all still quite
all strange.
new.
It's all weird, but then the world is weird. So you just kind of, when you learn to accept that, you just roll with it and do what you can. And I try and get up each day, do my best, and try and enjoy as much as I can. And I guess my life's had very strange turns. I was appointed youth mental health ambassador during the pandemic because I was campaigning about like changes that should be made. That a lot of that came off the back, as some people know and some people don't. My brother dying from suicide, so that, which I know we've spoken about before, that was a big thing for me in terms of like, right, I've got to do something here. And the whole being asked to be this volunteer basically came off the back of that. And I feel like I've done some positive things. There's more I would like to do. But I feel very lucky. I kind of say we've all had ups and downs in life, but I'm here, I'm doing my best.
No, I think it's fantastic. There are so many things that I want to touch on with you today, but to kind of bring it in terms of the mental health conversation and reality TV, what made you do that show?
It's a funny story because really, I had no intention to go on it. There's nothing against the show, actually. I watched the series before with Chris and Cam. At the end of it, I had a final, like me and my friends watched the final, and I was laughing. I was like, can you imagine going on that show? Like, it'd be crazy, it'd be mental. And my friend was like, oh yeah, well, you can apply. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. We're not going to apply. And anyway, fast forward like a good few months. I think it was almost like January time or maybe even February. I matched this girl on Bumble, and I was single, I was dating, and she turned out to be an ITV producer for Love Island. It was like, seriously, it was like,
is that how it came about?
It was like, I think you'd be great for Love Island. I was like, what?
So she was on Bumble casting for Love Island. I mean now I wouldn't put it past them.
They do cast everywhere, I think, don't they? I do think that, but for all reality TV, they do just kind of cast everywhere, don't they?
And that's actually a great way of doing it for a show like that.
Yeah,
that's
of course.
So did you go on a date with her?
No, we just spoke, and like I think she immediately was like, just so you know, I'm a producer. She was very professional about it. I think she was just kind of like, oh, like this is my personal account, but I actually think you'd be great. And I was like, haha, this is a joke. And I basically just didn't really want to have a call about it at first. And she said, just, come on, have a chat. Anyway, I went into work in A&E in Lewisham, and one of my consultants, Anna, I said to her, I'm very good friends with her, or had been. I don't speak to her so much these days. I don't work there anymore, but she's great. And I said to her, look, I've had this conversation, and I expected her to be like, oh, don't do that, that's crazy. She was like, oh my God, you've got to do the interview. I literally love that show. And I was like, really? I was like, okay, fine. So I listened to it.
And then it was a slippery slope.
Yeah, it literally was. I went to the interview, right? I turned up on the it was on a Friday afternoon, turned up the interview, you go into this lobby in the old ITV studios, it was on Embankment, the old one, wasn't it? Just by near Waterloo. Anyway, turned up, and my friend waited in the pub opposite. I said, I'll be out in like an hour, I don't know how long it'll be. I went in, there's about 20 guys in there, and everyone was very different to me, like no judgment in either direction, but I was very different to I think most of them, which is fine.
To be honest, I didn't actually, I think I started following you having no idea that you were on, because I never watched it. I've never watched it, so I couldn't really get my head around the idea that you were
They're just very different. No, and the guys there were like all, they were quite gym, like quite big guys, like strong tans. There's pale me who's like just turned up, going to the pub with my mate, like, finished A&E or whatever. And anyway, I went up and I was one of the last people to be interviewed that day. And anyway, everyone was in there for like 10, 20 minutes. I went in, I was in there for an hour. I was just chatting away to them. I was like, I'm not worried about, I was like, I'm never going to get on. I looked around, I thought, all these guys, I'm not going to get on there. I'm not that fussed anyway, whatever. Chatted to them about all sorts of stuff, like everything. I had them laughing a bit and we were having a good time. So, all right, see you later. Like, it was a lovely experience. Good to meet you. Thought, that's it. Saw my friend, said, right, come on, let's go out and have a few drinks. And on the Monday, I was cycling home, or the Tuesday, something like that. I was cycling home from work and my phone started going off. I thought, that's strange. Pulled over, answered the phone. It was like one of the execs being like, we really want to have a call with you. Like, really, like, want you to come on. I was like, oh my God. And just from then it happened. They said, we want you to, like, I can't remember, pretty sure they did say, we want you to start, kind of thing, like you'll be at the start. And
how did that make you feel?
I was just like, didn't want to do it.
You didn't want to do it?
Well, I didn't really. The thing is, I was 26, nearly 27.
You're working in A&E.
I loved my job. I had a great life. I lived in Fulham, lived by the Crabtree. Used to have a few beers. You know the Crabtree.
Yeah, of course.
Loved a few drinks on the Saturday there. Loved my life. Cycled to work. Great time. I didn't particularly like I didn't want to particularly. The reason that I did do it in the end was because, and again, it's nothing against it. And now I have no shame about being on the show. And I'm like, well, look at what I get to do from it. So it's not like snobbery, like I'm better than it. It's just when you're not settled into a career that you've worked your whole life for, it makes more sense. Whereas like, it's quite a big thing to do as someone that spent a lot of their life doing it. So there's nothing.
And it's like the polar opposite from what you were doing.
Being too good for it. I'm always like, yeah, I loved my time. It was a right experience. But basically, I lost a friend of mine at university to leukemia, and she's a wonderful person, like really, really amazing person called Freya Barlow, and she had leukemia and she went through chemo and had all this treatment, had bone marrow transplant, and we thought she was getting better. And then she went, relapsed again, and it was awful, like passed away far too young. But she said to me in the days before she passed away, she was like, I can't live my life further. I'm like, got my whole life I feel ahead of me, but I have to just give up on it now. Which is crazy as like a 21 year old to be like, she's there like ready to start living her life, and it's like, stop, she has no choice, just has to accept it. And she was like, please go and like live life and like do different things, try different things, don't be too rigid, just like enjoy life. And I kind of had that in my ear. I was like, I don't think you mean Love Island. But I was kind of like, oh God. And I've always had this fear of regret. I really don't want to regret not just kind of living life and trying to, not no kind of YOLO mentality. I just mean being like taking opportunity, enjoying moments, being present, be where your feet are, all that kind of stuff, and just take chances. So I was like, you know what, let's go for this. Like, what's the worst that can happen? So I thought I'd be on there for 2 weeks, and then it wasn't 2 weeks. It was like the whole show, and it was obviously a huge difference. I didn't expect. People I say, do you go on there with a game plan to like get followers? I literally, I can hand on heart tell you, I thought I'd be on there 2 weeks and back in A&E, like I didn't think I'd gain followers. I only had 200 followers. I didn't even think about my social media going in there really. I just gave my Instagram account to my best mate and said, just keep an eye on it or whatever. I had no plan. There's no plan to post stuff or create content. Those guys were just making up all sorts of stuff on there while I was on the show. They just posted whatever they fancied. I thought when I went in there, I was like, oh God, maybe I should have thought about this. I had no plan. Just went in and just see what happened. And
how did it impact your mental health being on a show like that? Coming out? I
think when you go into a situation where you are away from all family and friends in a place you don't know, people you don't know, and you've got no ability to talk to people from anyone you knew before, basically, for 8 or 9 weeks, it's going to be quite tough. There'll be highs and lows. And I think that's what it was. It was like big highs, big lows. Definitely found it difficult at times, but you know, it was genuinely an unbelievable experience. You look at it this way, like how many people can say that they'd done that? Not many. You know what I mean? It's harder. There was a joke that the producer said, it's harder to get into Love Island than it is Harvard. Like the number of people applying now these days to try and get into Love Island versus like,
that's mad.
I know it's a bit of a joke. Don't fact check me on that, people, but it's just kind of a funny thought. And you just think, you know what, this is just an experience. Just like, let's roll with it. But yeah, it was tough. It was definitely tough. Being away from family and friends was hard. You're literally playing out the early stages of dating in front of everyone. And my dating was a kind of car crash mostly. So it was great television. That's why I was there for so long, clearly. But I don't know. I think I always felt very different in what I wanted from a partner. And I think I was very different to people. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm the odd one out, really, and that's fine. But I think I was very different to people. And that isn't always easy when you're trying to connect. But funny enough, I did actually connect with people so well. I made some great friends on that show and in that time. I'm not saying I hang out with people from the show now, but because years go by, like I live a very different life to most people, not just in the level that most people would be like, your life is pretty weird. What you do all the time. And that's fine. But that time of life was a really interesting part of it. And without that show, I wouldn't, you know, I got 80 million quid towards mental health support teams at school. We've got this brand new national rollout of, well, hopefully if we can finally get the funding for early support hubs. We've certainly got the pilot ones. That's like a brand new initiative for mental health. Like I wouldn't have been able to be involved. This might have happened anyway, but I certainly wouldn't have been a part of it, you know?
I mean, that's fantastic.
Thank you. I'm just going to cough. Try to protect your ears. Nothing worse than it coughs on the mic. Yeah.
And you've mentioned already about the loss of your father, the loss of your brother and your friend. That must have been incredibly tough at such a young age. Would you be able to share a little bit about that?
Well, before this podcast recording, I was just down on the by St. Thomas's Hospital, which has at the front of it like the COVID memorial wall. And if you've ever seen it, it's all the hearts drawn on the wall just along Westminster, opposite the Parliament and things. It's like a long wall and they've got all the hearts, and my brother's name's actually on there. I couldn't find it today. There's so many names, which is sad. It's like 220,000 names on there.
Oh my God.
Which is like, it's kind of like, wow, you know, being down there again. I think grief is hard at any age and stage, and there's lots of forms of grief. We think of death, but of course grief also means like passing of time. Grief can also be over situations, relationships, pets. Is often when we think of grief as when a chapter closes, and some of those chapters are due to close, other ones aren't. And I think when you lose someone who's 19, who's, you know, at a place at medical school, who had his whole life ahead of him, that's very unnatural. Like I've lost grandparents, and that's awful and painful, and it's still loss. And you know, I've heard people describing and saying it doesn't matter how old your mother is when they pass away, they're still your mother. You know what I mean? It's still, you know, and I get that, but there's still like a natural order to life. But when that order isn't correct, like with Freya, for example, and with Llyr, that is then very difficult. What
was your brother's name?
Llyr. So it's Llyr. It's a Welsh name, and it means God of the Sea. I've actually got I've got a tattoo, which is, that's the wave for God of the Sea, and then I've got his name, which actually that was pulled from his school book at 10 years old. So that was his handwriting. So
that's beautiful.
And I chose his name because there's 10 years and 4 days between us, so I chose his name, which is funny because it's like Alex, Elliot, and Llyr. So it's like two.
Why did you choose that?
My parents like, choose a Welsh name, and I was like, okay, I'll choose a Welsh name then. And I went for a proper Welsh name. So he loved it though. He liked it. He didn't, when he was growing up, he was like, you chose to be a difficult name, but then he grew into it and liked it. So.
And did you know that he was struggling at all? Did he speak about stuff?
I mean, he was a 19-year-old in the middle of lockdown, and I think that's difficult, and it's very hard to judge when people like what level is they're struggling is very difficult. I think people don't say enough. I think people should talk more when they're in difficult spots. Certainly didn't know he was in the place he was in, and I think part of that as a family you always carry like an element of responsibility. The kind of the pizza slice analogy is quite a good way of looking at it. Like everyone that was involved in his life will feel likely, they may not, but most of them will feel they take a piece of that responsibility. If you ask my parents, they'll say, oh, it's 98% our fault, which is obviously not true. But when you look at it from an objective way, you're like, okay, there's bits that we can all take from this. And that's life. And that's the most difficult thing with this kind of situation, is that there's no one's going to give you an answer. You can't come and tell you, can he, and say, no, it wasn't your fault. You know, but you have to be able to have some ability to rationalize it. Otherwise you just ruin your life. Your whole life is lost to that. But it's been very hard. I only look back now and realize how rocky I'd been for a good couple of years, up until probably about 6 months to a year ago. You know, I don't know how I did it, really. I look back and think there's been some real dark times, difficult times, and living it out in the public eye has been very difficult.
Well, also with the work that you do, right? Because you have been so influential in helping people in this space, but then to be going through it.
Well, every time, and it's fine, we're talking about it, but every time that I've ever talked about it, every time I campaign, every time I use a name talking about him passing away, it's like a knife back into me while I'm trying to like make progress. It's like you're harming yourself while trying to help others. That is basically what it is. And I don't want to, I'm not expecting a violin or pity from it. It is the path I've chosen, but it's the catch-22. Like the more progress I make and the more noise I make, the more I work in this, the more I'm, picking at a wound.
Are you okay talking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes and no. Like it often does hurt, but I mean, he's gone. And in many ways, the way that I justify this is that if I can, and we and in his legacy can prevent other things happening like that, then that's important. And it's a difficult way to think, I guess, in some sense. But like, so many people have not died because he died, and I know that objectively from the number of people that have told me in person and in messages, and family and mothers and people written letters and saying like how things have been averted, or people have told me they've got help. Like, I mean, it's like thousands of examples. And
that's incredible, but also it must feel quite a heavy responsibility.
Yeah, it's heavy. But then it's like, so if he hadn't have died, would those people have died? And that's the thing with life, the domino effect of life, and why I think you should never want to go back and change things. Like, selfishly, would I go back and have him back? Yeah, but would I honestly go and change the past? I don't think I would. I don't think I'd go back and change it. If you meddle with one thing in the past, everything changes. That's not the same as would I want him back. I'd have him back in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But and I think that's why acceptance is very important. Even with the most cruelest, worst things that have happened, it's like trying to find some sense of acceptance. The only way that you can live your life, it's the only way you can then like move forward. And I think it's easier said than done. And there's definitely times where I go backwards, and my parents go backwards sometimes as well. Which, as a parent, how do you get over that? Truly, fully, how do you get over that? It's not a normal thing, is it? To lose your son or child in any way, for like Freya's family, for anyone that's lost a young person, it's very, very difficult. But
are you comfortable talking about your brother?
Yeah, I think it's something that I've spoken about so much now, and in many ways I guess it's kind of therapy. Like, the basis of therapy is that you expose and you process something in a way that makes sense to your brain, or you're able to kind of deal with it. It's a bit more complex than that, because of course you're trying to not just expose yourself to not have as big an emotional trigger or response for it, but you're trying to like make sense of what's happened. But in many ways it's kind of been exposure therapy. It's like when you look at a picture of a loved one that's passed, and it like really triggers you, but the more you look at that picture, you very rarely end up at the same heights of kind of agitation or being as upset, because your brain learns to just accept what is, and then the other part is trying to make sense of some of it. But yeah, it's not easy to talk about, and it in many ways, like a lot of the work I've done, the campaigning, as much as I push forward and I try and when I'm talking in number 10 Downing Street, or I'm at a an activist meeting, or whether I'm it's talking on a television set or whatever about it, it is painful, and that's kind of the catch-22 of what I do. To help, I have to accept picking it as a painful scab, but I know that the outcome is the potential legacy and outcome for him is huge. If anything, yes, he's passed away, but there is life in him, in the sense that if we can help other young people and prevent other families, because there's nothing like, I'm not comparing, and I say to my family always say, there's someone out there, there's people out there that have it worse and have, it's not about trauma comparing, it's not helpful, but it's always, important to remember, like, this is our experience, but other people have got their own experiences. But you really wouldn't wish it on a family, on your worst enemy. And so we see it that, like, this is ours to bear, but we don't want other people to go through it if we can avoid it.
And in terms of talking about it a lot for the work that you do, what about talking about it at home? Does that happen? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting better as a family talking about it. I think different members of the family talk more and talk less. People process things in their own way and at their own time. I think that's the important thing with grief, is that although there are stages of grief in theory, the way that people move through those stages and get to the eventual point of acceptance differs from one person to the next. And you can go backwards. You can go from a stage where you're like moving forward, and you're in like the depression stage, and then you're ready to move on to the next one, but then something knocks you back. And I think probably learning to be like kind of okay with that is important. And also different days. Some days you feel stronger, other times you don't. But I think in reality, everyone experiences it. The odd thing about this country in the UK, more so probably than the rest of Europe, is that we are so afraid and awkward to talk about like death, but like that's part of life. And it is fundamentally outside of, I'm not talking about my brother's situation, outside of all that, death is what makes life so incredible. Like if you live forever and everything was guaranteed and everything was, like the Truman Show, life wouldn't be what it is. It's magical because you only have so much time. Like time is the one thing we spend that we never get back. And there's like a preciousness to that. And I think that's where some of my fear of wasted time or regrets is so big, is because I just feel very like omni-aware that there is only this like a short period of time. It's like crazy if you think about it, like how big the universe is to sizes we can't comprehend, and how much time has passed that we don't even understand. We're alive for like that long. It's like a deflection from the baseline and back of how long your life is. It's just so short, and yet it is so incredible. Like we do all this kind of stuff, like it still blows my mind. Like how does this mic work? How did all the world, like we've made all this from earth and dust, and we're just here just doing our thing for like hopefully 70, 80 years, maybe more. And I think that's what is amazing about life. And you've got to accept that sometime your time will come to an end, but also probably you're going to experience losing loved ones as well. And I think the better we get at talking about grief and learning to, just be a bit more open, probably when times come where you lose someone, maybe we'll deal with it better. Maybe we won't, but I think we probably would.
Aside from the obvious that it's a big, heavy topic, why do you think we find it so hard to talk about, and why do you think we avoid it, especially as Brits, like you say?
Well, I mean, avoidance is something that a lot of humans do for a lot of different situations. Funny enough, one of the best things I've ever learned from therapy is what my therapist says, Dr. Taryn, is avoid the avoidance is like the number one rule of therapy. Avoid the avoidance. And any time you find yourself moving away from something, just ask yourself why am I avoiding this? Why am I not engaging with this? And if you're doing it for the avoidance of pain, you should be moving towards it. Not in any kind of sadistic sense, but if you're moving away because you find that memory difficult, why? Let's move towards it. Let's sit with it. Let's expose ourselves to it so that we can move past it. And if it's a conversation you find hard, why avoiding that conversation with your loved one or partner, whatever it is? A lot of avoidance as well isn't as clear as moving away. Like alcohol is avoidance for a lot of people, drugs, overworking, over-exercising, all these different ways that we find just to not sit with what is, so many people in this country are lonely. And what is most people's, that's not fair, what is a lot of people's way of avoiding loneliness? Alcohol and things like that. I mean, I've been there, hands up, like you're not even aware that you're doing it. What do people say when you suggest like, oh, I wonder what it's like to not drink? They go, oh, it'll be boring. By boring, they mean lonely. That's what we mean, right? We're afraid of being alone or lonely. Like, if your life is boring not drinking, it means that we need to work on making a more enjoyable and interesting life, don't we? Isn't that the truth?
100%.
Or if we feel that we lack connection when we don't drink, we need to find other ways to connect. And so the avoidance bit is huge. And when it comes to death, I think we avoid it because it's not nice. You think, I want to be here forever. But the problem is when we live life as if we're here forever, we don't live it truly, I think we don't then give it everything. There's no practice run. There's no like rerun of this. It's like one shot. And I don't mean it as in like, oh yeah, go out, maximum productivity. I mean like sitting on a Sunday night, put a film on, relax, but be where your feet are, be where you are, and be immersed. Whatever you're doing, be there. And I'm not saying this as someone has got it all cracked. One of the biggest challenges I have is I often, because of that, think about the future and like, what am I doing? Am I, should I be working towards this? So it's something I actively have to check myself with. So ironically, even though it's one of the biggest things that I'm like focused on, it's also oddly a weakness of mine. But that's okay because I'm aware of it. And for that reason, I'm quite good at then grounding myself and going, I'm here right now. Tomorrow's problems can be dealt with tomorrow.
What are those practices? What do they look like? Because like you say, it's the trickery of the mind that it's not like we're going, oh, I want to avoid that feeling, therefore I'm going to go and drink or numb out or whatever it might be. We convince ourselves that that's the right thing to do. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah. So for example, a good question to ask yourself is like, in what I'm doing, am I moving towards something or away from something? And in my decision, and in many ways, I think I've been trying to do this for a good number of years, but this was actually an idea brought by Dr. Ian Jordan, who's a psychiatrist, and he came on my podcast, The Stompcast, which obviously we went for a walk on. And I love this way of putting it, this idea of like, are you avoiding something right now by moving away from it or towards it? And like a good example would be, if you're going to drink alcohol on a Saturday night, are you drinking alcohol because you're moving towards connection and being socializing and it's just like a bit of fun and you just enjoy having a drink or two? Or are you drinking to move away from loneliness, to move away from pain, and you're looking for numbness? So like when I was at uni, I was doing a lot of like the connecting part of it. It was just there to connect with others.
And then it became something else.
And then when, my brother passed away, it was always about numbness. It was not about connection. It was about numbness. Same tool, different reason. And so I think that can be really helpful. And then in terms of like grounding yourself, I think when you find yourself moving into the future and you start getting anxious, or you're starting becoming like having a lot of self-doubt, and you're just not in the present, simple things like just put both feet on your ground and be like, where am I right now? Just feel the floor under your feet, feel the seat where you're sitting, notice things. A simple technique you can use is the 5 senses. You look around the room, name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can 4 things you can feel, so like touch and the seat and all that, and then you go through your senses of smell, scent and taste, like even just having a drink of your coffee or tea. And even those tricks are good ways to bring yourself back in the room. And then gratitude is probably the other biggest thing. Oddly, gratitude is amazing at just grounding you. Like if you're thinking, oh gosh, should I have gone out tonight? Maybe everyone's having fun. What are you grateful for right now? I'm sat here on the couch with Rolo, my dog. I'm comfortable. I've got a great film on. I'm going to get up tomorrow morning, go for a run. As soon as you start doing these gratitude things, your brain starts honing into what it has rather than what it doesn't have. And that's a great example of things. How often do you find yourself thinking about the things you don't have rather than things you do have? When you do that and you start going, oh, but I should be doing this, I should have that, maybe I should have. What do you have? What have you got?
Switching,
and you realise you've got a lot.
And in terms of the sobriety piece and that avoiding of big feelings and how we can kind of all be creative in the ways that we do that, it's kind of like that, right? It's the big feelings we want to avoid. When did you realize that you were using alcohol as a kind of coping strategy? And tell us a little bit about your sobriety journey.
Yeah, so I'm 33, and I think, I grew up in, I said, Wales. I think rugby was a big part. Is it working right? Okay. Oh, sorry. I'll pick it up again. So I'm 33 and I grew up in West Wales, and I think, rugby culture and drinking was a big part of that growing up, and went to uni. Med school is like people drink so much, or they used to drink certainly a lot of med school. Just a big part of that uni life, I guess. And then throughout working life and 20s, and just drinking quite a lot, but probably, you think it's quite a normal amount in society. So drinking like 2 nights a week, having a good couple of drinks, sometimes 3, which is very normal, especially in London, right? It's just part of it.
Yeah.
And I think the reason changed as I got older. I think the reason was about the numbing part of it. And I think particularly after my brother died, so like 3 years ago, but also actually and something I really realized was that I probably was kind of micro using it to kind of manage ADHD as well. I was diagnosed with ADHD about 2 years ago, and without realizing I was probably trying to round the edges of that.
To just bring everything down a little bit. Yeah, to bring everything
down. I mean, oddly, alcohol is kind of good at some parts of numbing the ADHD, but also reduces your inhibition, which in an impulsive person with ADHD is not ideal.
What did that look like?
I just think, well, just like louder, like really like louder, just making like even silly things like I would just like book a holiday and stuff like that. And I'd be like, really shouldn't have done that, or buy something silly. I'm like, why have I done that? Just like just being impulsive, or like ending up like I was supposed to have like 2 drinks. I've ended up on a whole night out, which I know a lot of people relate to anyway. That often happens, right? But it just affected everything. And then I would be so much more anxious the next day and the next few days, because when you start playing with your dopamine, so one of your neurotransmitters, especially someone with ADHD, it can really affect things like anxiety and your mood.
I've never heard about that connection before.
Between that, well, I mean, so anything that gives you a sense of reward will boost your dopamine levels. So whether it's a chocolate bar, whether it's a run, or whether it's a pint of beer, it's all going to do it.
I mean more to do with the ADHD though, and how that was sort of used for you to curb the edges.
Very common. So around up to, it's between 40 and 50% of all people with ADHD have a diagnosable alcohol use disorder. So how they use alcohol is disordered. I mean, what does that really mean? It usually means they're using it often without realizing, just to manage their ADHD, particularly in things like intense social situations, or like nights out and pubs and things like that.
Yeah.
Often not realizing. I think a huge amount of the general population do. You hear a lot of people say about social anxiety, but if I don't have a drink, I don't want to be in the pub. Then you're actually using it to kind of manage yourself through that situation. It's very, very common. And rates of addiction and stuff in ADHD are very, very high. You know, you've got alcohol plays the dopamine, but it crashes it the next few days as well. So I think those two things for me, I just realized I was like, I don't think alcohol is helpful in ADHD. I think there's some people that would watch this or listen to this and say, disagree with you. I've got ADHD and it's fine, and that's cool. But in the vast majority of cases, it's not helpful. It's because it makes the bad side of ADHD worse, like impulsivity, for example. But then it makes it makes the good sides of ADHD worse. So things like the creativity, the kind of ability to kind of like flip between different ideas, the hyperfocus, it ruins all those things.
Mm-hmm.
But then it also, brings out the bits that you don't want, like the impulsivity and so on. So the disinhibition and things. So yeah, alcohol and ADHD doesn't really mix. And also I was just realizing, it was just like, this alcohol's not helping me. I was like 20 stone overweight. I was eating a lot because I was drinking a lot. I wasn't exercising. I started feeling quite stuck. The grief was just being locked in. And so I just stopped drinking. I think it was the 4th of December, 2022. I was like, that's it. I'm stopping. I don't know how long, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, a month, 3 months, I don't know. Stopped. And I didn't drink at all throughout 2023, and I haven't drunk up to now. And I don't count anymore. After I did, I think the 4 or 5 months, I was like, I'll do the year. And then once I did the year, I thought I'm not going to count, because then it becomes like a prison almost in itself.
A pressure as well, yeah.
Yeah, which is fine. People that do count it, and I will probably celebrate, if I hit 2 years, I'll celebrate it, but I'm not counting day by day. And different people, that's no judgment on the way other people do it. And the important thing I'd say is I don't have addiction. I've never suffered with addiction, so that's a completely different thing to manage and so on. So my experiences with someone who had alcohol damaged them a lot, the health. So not having addiction doesn't mean alcohol is damaging your life. And I think that's a real mistake we make in the way we use the language in this country. They're like, oh, you've got a problem, you've got addiction. And like, oh, no, I'm not addicted. Oh, well, you're fine then. It's like, well, you can have severe liver damage. I didn't have liver damage or anything, but you could have liver damage, severe issues being, like, let's say, overweight, like for me, causing lots of social issues in your life, and not be addicted.
Yeah.
So I think that's sometimes a mistake. Alcohol did cause a lot of damage in my life. Of course it did. And for me, like, my life is so much better not drinking. It's just, I'm a better person to be around. I'm a better person. I'm happier. I'm calmer. I'm more productive. I've always been a little bit hyper-productive as part of me, but I'm even more productive, but in a way that I enjoy, not kind of dragging myself through. And I have more money as well. It's great. I don't spend as much. Like, alcohol's really expensive.
Alcohol is really expensive.
Rosé is really expensive.
And what about, so tell me about the ADHD. Because how did you discover that you had that, and what does that look like for you?
I'd always thought that I've always felt different growing up. I've always been different. I've had hyper focus. I've always been at school, like found it hard to engage in classes and stuff. But I've always been intelligent. I've always been someone that just gets stuff really quickly, and like I've been able to apply myself, but found the traditional academic setting difficult. But when I focused in, I could really kind of focus in. Throughout university, I was lucky because the way we did med school in our university, very modern way of doing it, wasn't like sit down lectures. A lot of it was online. All the practical stuff was in person. And for someone with ADHD, when you're interested in something, that's amazing. And I really like took off at uni in many ways. I think I just loved medicine. I loved health, and it was in this kind of dopamine rich environment. And I did really well. Like I did well at med school. And that worked really well. But I think where it came up for me and was like more problematic was probably just my own general life outside of work and stuff, and making decisions impulsively. For example, I was like, I want to ride motorbikes, so then I do the test as fast as I can, and I want to buy 3 bikes, and I didn't buy 3 bikes, but I wanted to buy 3 bikes. And it's like that kind of thing. You're like, why am I like this? Why am I so impulsive? Also, why does my mood swing between this and that really quickly?
And do you find it hard to focus on one project at a time?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at my life, I've got like 10 different tabs, so more than that, probably 10
you should
tabs.
see my computer's got like the reason I'm asking so much is, and especially to do with the alcohol thing, is I feel like I'm like that, and I really struggle with things that I think people would find quite straightforward.
Yeah. And for example, I have sat in front of the Prime Minister and debated why we need to fund mental health funding, and brought facts out that my brain has just got all of these things in there because it's something I'm interested in. I'll retain everything about it, but then I can't organise my own like baked beans in the cupboard. I can't sort like my wardrobe, like certain tasks become impossible. And people are like, how can you do these things? Like,
I can do the big things, but I can't do
exactly. Now that's the challenge. I mean, there's a good example. So when I started as a doctor, I worked on a general medical ward, which is very common to do. And you had like 30 patients on the ward. I would remember like 10 of the blood results for like all 30 patients for like days in a row, like maybe not every single one, but a lot of them, because my brain was just one. And like, these are like very random numbers, like 5.4, 132. And I just would remember that because my brain was locked in. But at the same time, I can't remember my mobile number. It's taken me 2 years to learn my new mobile number now. And I can't remember any of my family's birthdays other than like Clear's, because it's 4 days after mine. But I struggle to remember birthdays. I really struggle. But I can remember things if my brain decides it's going to lock in on something.
If it's interested in it.
But oddly, I think it's more with me. It's like, can it get it somewhere else? So because I know I can pick up I can get my mobile phone number. I don't know. I tried to work it out. I think it's because my brain knows it's in my pocket. But
Doesn't
if I want
have
to be able
to.
yeah, but like whereas like remembering all that stuff just seems to stick. It's so weird.
Because I have that with like if I'm driving around London, I'm like I'll use Google Maps for everything, even a route that I should know pretty well. Yeah. Sometimes my boyfriend will be like, "Why do you need Google Maps?" Because my brain's like, I don't want to
like the map where everything is. So I like generally, I think within zone 3, I can get anywhere. I could be a cab driver. I think I wouldn't be able to tell you that road, but I could take you anywhere because my brain
lived in
loves
London
it.
My whole life.
My brain loves that. But then other things, I'll have similar examples with my brain. I'm like, I can't remember that. I can't you how many people will be like, it's ridiculous, how can you not remember your number? It's not from lack of trying. Then I have this embarrassing thing where I always say to like, it's usually like you put your name down for a reservation at a table or something. I'm like, oh, let me check quickly, I've got a new number. It's like, I haven't, it's been like 2 years. It's embarrassing, isn't it?
I mean, luckily I've had the same number since I've had a phone, so I actually do know.
I think
Otherwise,
I've got it now. I'm not going to recite it now because I haven't had my number. I've got it now. I've finally cracked it because it has become so irritating. I've forced myself to learn it.
And what do you do now to manage the ADHD?
Oh gosh, I mean, I've learned, honestly, the best thing about being diagnosed by ADHD, it's been about a year and a half, maybe slightly longer now, is that you learn so much. It's not even about the medication or whatever.
But do you take medication for it?
So I've been prescribed medication that I use sometimes. So it's Ritalin, which is a short-acting medication and just helps me really focus in when I'm doing something. a task probably that isn't that exciting or interesting, but is necessary. So
Like your tax or something.
or like literally, it's usually people would think you take it for like going for a big meeting. You don't need it for the big meeting.
No, we need it for the little things.
Yeah, because your brain that's dopamine.
Yeah.
It's the stuff that's actually, your tax is actually really important, but is not exciting. And that's
But it will be avoided.
Yeah, the avoidance. There you go. So I'd use it for that. But honestly, I've learned so much. First of all, alcohol, just like if you've got ADHD, it's like, it's actually not, forget the bad side, it's actually stopping you from achieving what you can achieve, your like genuine potential.
Yeah.
That's huge. I mean, look, I've lost like more than 6 stone probably, because I went from like 20 plus stone. I think I'm like 14 stone now, but I've put on a lot of muscle, like training as well as fitness. I've lost a lot of weight, and I'm the fittest I've ever been. I'm so energized. And I think that does tie into the ADHD stuff as well. I think that's part of it.
And how so?
I think just I think the fact that I don't drink now, I'm able just to like level my kind of dopamine, I guess, probably a lot better. I'm a lot calmer, and therefore I'm much better at maintaining good habits. I think with ADHD it can be like all or nothing, whereas I find now I'm much better at, like, I've never been more consistent with like exercise. But in terms of managing it, other things like meditation is huge. Like, it's absolutely massive in terms of helping it.
Do you have to watch your caffeine intake?
Caffeine, so a lot of people are either caffeine sensitive or insensitive with ADHD. So like some people drink caffeine or drink coffee or whatever and have caffeine, and they find the ADHD gets better. Other people it gets worse. For me, if I drink coffee, it makes it better.
Why would it be different?
So caffeine has like a similar caffeine has a similar effect to almost like Ritalin, in the sense that it's a stimulant. So the way that methylphenidate and other short-acting stimulant medications work is that they stimulate the frontal part of your brain that is underactive in ADHD. So basically, it's boosting your dopamine levels to what would be a normal level, so you have a normal experience. And by boosting the dopamine levels, you're not then seeking those kind of dopamine hits. So the problem is, if you think of it this way, if you've got a brain that's depleted of dopamine, the brain is starved of dopamine. It wants dopamine. So it wants it from chocolate, it wants it from a beer, it wants it from exercise, it wants it from a relationship, or an interaction, or a risk, or gambling. It's like wants these hits, but
it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, right?
Yeah, that's the problem. So it'll come up and down, up and down. So what we're doing is raising the dopamine, so you don't need to be on the hunt. You can chill out. You don't need to be on the hunt for dopamine. But that's one way you can do it. Other ways you can do it, and it depends often on the severity of ADHD as well, is by doing other things. Like meditating is amazing. Exercise is absolutely incredible for ADHD. Ice baths are brilliant as well. Anything that gives you a long tail of dopamine, so rises your dopamine and lets it drift down slowly, like exercise, for example. All of those things are brilliant for doing that. Just kind of giving you a calm level of dopamine. You know that feeling, you go for a run, you come back, and for hours you just feel elated.
Yeah.
That's just like a hit of endorphins, but it's also that like boost of dopamine as well.
So is exercise a huge one for your mental health now?
Huge. I think it's probably for a lot of people as well. I think to tap into things. Running has been like a revolutionary thing for me. I've always like been sporty. I've always played rugby, played football, but I've never been a runner. And I've often lifted a lot of weights and things. Weights does give you a lot of endorphins, but there's something about running that for me, nothing has ever matched it, in terms of like when you hit that kind of runner's high, it's just phenomenal. And I don't know if I have an even bigger runner high because of the ADHD. I don't know, but I seem to just feel so much better. Like it's probably one of the few things that can genuinely completely change my day, like go from a terrible day to a really good day.
Yeah, I think I need to get back into running.
So and when you don't do it for a while, you forget how unbelievable it is. Then you're like, why have I not done this? This is literally amazing. But yeah, anyone with ADHD listening, honestly, or they think they have ADHD, first of all, get diagnosed regardless of whether you want meds or not, or whether you think I need medication. It's about understanding. You learn so much about yourself. Honestly, for me, it was like a light switch went on and I could suddenly see everything in my life with clarity. I understood my entire life.
By having the diagnosis, or because
because I understood. I was like, oh my God, this is why I am as I am. And I've been like this my entire life and I never understood it. Mm-hmm. It's very horrible when you feel very different to people, I think. When you feel like there's like an average and you're like stood outside the room. And that's something always felt that I've slightly been outside the room.
I feel like that.
And it's tough, isn't it, when you're like that? And I look through my family. My granddad clearly had ADHD. I can see, oh my gosh, he was a businessman who like moved from England to South Africa and then to other countries around the world doing it. He was chasing dopamine all of his life. My dad definitely has ADHD.
So I don't think any of my family, not that I know of, do, and so it feels like I'm a squiggle in a family of straight lines.
Yeah, don't forget though, isn't always work like that way that you can track it through. Sometimes it's not as genetic in that sense. But also the other key thing is that if you're a woman, it's very likely that your ADHD will be not as overtly obvious in the way we think of it, and this is why, because boys, so there's different kinds of ADHD. So you've got hyperactive, combined, and inattentive. So hyperactive is like the young boy bouncing around the room, jumping around the room. That's the typical view. Mm-hmm. But actually only about 10% of cases appear like that. So think of the name attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and yet very few people are actually hyperactive, which is a big problem because people think it's that or nothing.
Yeah.
You've then got your inattentive, which tends to be like your internal ADHD. So a lot of it's in your mind. It's not external. They're not bouncing around. They're not fidgety, but there's like flight of thoughts. Lots of thinking, like the brain, the inward stuff.
Overactive mind.
Yeah, like and it's so it's harder to explain the inattentive, but like for example, a lack of ability to like focus on things, to initiate tasks. People struggle with like quite big shifts in their emotion and stuff like that. If you think of dopamine, it's not just a reward hormone, it's also one of your mood hormones. So when it's up and down, your mood goes with that. If I feel really got a high dopamine hit, I feel great, I feel good. Those words, I feel great, I feel good, because the dopamine's up. When it's low, I don't feel good. No one feels good when the dopamine's low. Your brain's then wanting it. So the difference is, I think, a lot of it is this very internalized. So a lot of it's inside your own mind. It's not as seen. And then you've got this combined type, which is a bit of a mix of, it basically means a mix of everything, which is quite a lot of people. But because a lot of women are actually inattentive, they don't get diagnosed. So
why is that they are inattentive?
It's a good question as to why that appears more overtly in women. Part of it may be genetic. Also, the differences in things like hormones and stuff like that. Also, if you think of like the behavioral characteristics of how men tend to be versus women in general, you tend to have differences of behavior and the way, things like testosterone, the way that men can be. Like, you do see differences often, I think, between men and women. It's not a solid.
Could it be social?
But socialization, what's acceptable, for example, might be the way that men. The only acceptable form of emotion that men are usually allowed to show is anger. If you actually think about it, society accepts men being angry, but men being women. Crying or sad, or being a woman being angry becomes a problem. But a man can be angry, right? Which is very interesting. So obviously, it's sex. There's actually quite a lot of sexism in both parts there, because we're not okay. Men can't cry. I mean, I was told growing up, be a big boy, man up, get on with it. Crying was weak. It's ridiculous. A statement, but. Yeah, you see that. It's not acceptable for a woman to be angry, but men are allowed to be angry. So I think some of it's, where you allow that to, where does that energy go? Where does it get channeled? But, when you learn to channel that energy, you can channel your hyper-focus into productivity when it's there, be accepting when you're having a day that's just, some days I can do a million miles an hour, other days I can't do anything. Yeah. And I'm very accepting of that now. I'm much better accepting. I know this one of those days. It's fine.
Don't force it.
It's fine. Whereas in the past, I was like, why am I like this? Everyone else is consistent. I can't concentrate. I need to write this essay and I can't even look at the page. And you learn to accept it much better. And I think that's the biggest thing about being diagnosed. And it's estimated by the ADHD Foundation, there's about 2 million people in the UK that have ADHD that don't even realise they have it. Yeah.
And this is going to sound like a ridiculous question, but where do you go?
Well, I mean, for diagnosis at the moment, you go and see your GP, you get referred then to on the NHS for assessment, depending where you are in the country. Some of that's a short wait list, some of it's really long. Like when I was looking into it, I think it was something like 2 years in London where I was looking. So I pay privately, but it's not cheap. It was like 800 quid to get
really?
Assessed. A lot of money, and I'm very fortunate I could do that.
And then what happens after they're like, you have ADHD?
Yeah, so the diagnosis, so you basically get referred, then you'll be assessed, and it takes time. People think like, oh yeah, well, everyone's going to get an ADHD diagnosis. It's like, giving someone a lifelong diagnosis is a very serious thing to do. And it's not that it's bad having ADHD, but you need to know that you're, with a great degree of certainty, that you're right. And so they speak to your family, like they interview your family and friends and stuff like that. You do multiple touch points with them, and they kind of assess your entire life. It's a long old process, and it should be because they need to be relatively very confident that that is the right diagnosis. But once you're diagnosed, then it's about, first of all, learning. Like the first thing I would say to anyone is just learn, like follow some ADHD accounts and the community accounts sharing experiences, like read about it, learn about what it is, and then look at what your options are. And for some people that's medication, but for a lot of people it isn't. I don't take medication day to day. I can use it if I want to. I find that I've managed to improve my life a lot just doing the other stuff.
Interesting. Okay, I'm definitely going to look into that myself. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about in the work that you do, and we touched on it a second ago in terms of, men's difficulty as a society, that they aren't encouraged to express other emotions outside of anger. How do you see that impacting men's mental health? And because I know that probably contributes hugely to suicide being such a huge issue for men under 30, is it?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, the leading cause of death for men under 45 is suicide, and the rates of suicide in men versus women is much higher. I mean, it's multiple times higher.
Yeah.
And often we talk about, what's the difference, Yes, there are differences biologically and genetically between men and women. We know that in the way they express. So we have our genotype, which is our genes and the coding, and then the phenotype is our expression of those genes. Like, men appear differently, have masculine features, the testosterone has its effect on the body, and I think there are impacts of that. But largely, a lot of what the issue is with regards to mental health and suicide is how we culture boys and how society shapes them. Society craves men. Society craves men to speak, but we train them to be silent. We train them to be quiet, as in keep the sadness within you. Think of the words that we use as boys growing up: man up, be tough, be strong. All these words are about being, keeping the emotion in. Girls and women they talk about emotions, they're much more open. Like, I've seen it, especially because I've been interested in this space. I watch like women and how they interact and how men interact, what men talk about versus what women talk about, and it's completely different. Even like the girls that work with me, and I often talk with them about this topic, and they're like, it's just crazy, like how their boyfriends will talk to each other versus how the girls will talk to each other, and what they talk about. Like, the girls will often, this is obviously stereotyping to an extent, but it is to try and highlight what we are seeing on a kind of macro level, is that men just generally don't talk as much about problems. They keep it inwardly. Women, on a general level, seem to kind of communicate about those problems more. And I think a lot of that is about how we bring people up. And that's why I'm so passionate about having, education at school about emotional literacy, getting people to, as soon as you're old enough to have thoughts, you're old enough to learn to control them, to manage them, to think about emotions and know how to use them. And it's not about creating a cohort of people that are, you hear the snowflake stuff. Actually, it's about making really resilient people, young people.
For those that aren't familiar, what's the snowflake stuff?
This idea of the snowflake is a kind of it's a term that's been coined to say that like the younger generation are weak and we're feeble.
Bit precious.
Precious, can't handle things. I mean, if you want some evidence, look at the pandemic. I mean, what they went through in that time. You can see a lot of evidence there of the strength, but what it's about is training, and helping and supporting, educating, so that you have young people who are resilient. And what resilience means to me is that rather than being, when you're under pressure and you're under pressure like this, rather than bending and breaking, you're able to like flex with the pressure and then come back to your former state, or even better, ideally. So it's your ability to cope and go with pressure, but be able to kind of return. And the way that you do that doesn't have to be about being stoic and quiet. It's about getting help, support from people, self-care, looking after yourself. Like the running and all this stuff that I do, it's great for my body and I'm fit, but actually it's my mind, right? If I had a stressful day and I run, I can deal with so much more stress. Or it's not even like I want to take on more stress. I can just deal with stress better. If I don't run, I'm not as good at dealing with it. It's a very simple way of putting it, but that's what it's all about. But we need to have gender-specific support, and that's what science shows, is that actually
at school,
at school,
or
but
even
also
earlier.
why school, but also in the adult sphere as well. Because what we are learning more and more, and this is shown with evidence, that gender-specific support works, and also if you don't think about that, then you're excluding men. They won't necessarily come forth to the traditional things you'd think of. For example, if you think of traditional therapy, and I get therapy every week, so yes, men will use it, but for a lot of men, they don't want to come and sit it down like chairs like this, where you sat together and you've got a book, let's talk about emotions. Whereas the most successful places I've seen have been ways that have gone to men and thought about the environments they want to be in. Like there's a place called the Workshed on the South Coast, and they literally thought, right, we've got lots of like men who are struggling with mental health. What do we do? Well, they got a work shed, and they thought, you know what, we'll pick different things in the community that we need, like a new park bench. We'll get men together, we'll build it. So building these benches are the men, and they have some of the people that run it, they've had training in kind of mental health and mental health first aid, and they kind of spot the signs of some of them that are struggling, or they start opening up, or they learn to start communicating while building, and that gets everyone talking about things, but also they can access the therapy and the support if they want it through that.
It's the sort of alongside each other versus face to face.
I went to a boxing gym in North London. It was started by a young group of Jewish boys who were like, the amount of anti-Semitism that's going on at the moment is horrendous, and they were like, we need to support the mental health of the young Jewish community. And they started this boxing gym because they thought, right, what we'll do is we'll do free boxing, but when you come in, you've got to do wellness. You've got to do, I think it's 20 minutes of well-being, education and practice before you get the boxing session. And then all the coaches are trained in mental health first aid, and they have attached to the boxing gym psychologist, and they refer them through. So these young men are coming in, they're like, yeah, coach, like it's been a tough time, doing the boxing, whatever. And they're opening up because they see them as massive. The coaches are, they're boxers. They open up, okay, what's going on, like at home or whatever. Next thing you know, you've got them into therapy and they're getting support. So gender-specific stuff works, and that's exactly why. Like I started Mettle, METTLE, the mental fitness app, and it's for men. So there's over 20,000 health apps on the App Store, and not one is focused on men's mental fitness. Of all of those apps, so me, Bear Grylls, Paul McKenna, and a group of mental health, mental fitness experts made this app because we want to have gender-specific meditation and support. There's great meditation apps out there, there's great mindfulness apps, but they're designed for women. Even in the colorways, the voices, the way it's used. This is a gamified platform that is targeted and focused and like in the way that men want to have it. And I think this is something we've started as a project, but I think the whole way that the country needs to view mental health needs to think about that. Go to men. Don't always expect men to come to you. And if you want to change the way that men are, then educate young, get young people talking. And if you want to see, does it work? I mean, I visit so many schools. I can tell you the schools I visit now. I did a talk the other day to a school, and there's 8-year-olds there, and these 8-year-old boys were talking about, the feelings, the mood. They were talking about emotions. They were talking about, like, even like we're talking about sleep, and they were saying about how when you sleep, your brain takes all the files from that day and organizes them, puts them in the filing cabinet.
That's how I describe it.
This 8-year-old boy said this. 8-year-old boy. When I was at school, when I was 18, I didn't know what depression was. I was going to med school. I distinctly remember hearing about depression before. I was thinking it before my med school interview. I was like, what? I need to check out what this depression is. Never heard of it. Literally, I'd heard of it, like the word used, but I thought it just meant crying. Thought like depression, like you're just crying all the time. No idea. This kid's like they're telling me about how the brain stores information when it sleeps.
That's fantastic.
I mean, isn't that amazing? So it works, and there's good work happening out there.
And on the other side of that, though, because obviously we've spoken about how it can impact men and the statistics around suicide and things like that. But what are your thoughts around the sort of movement that's happening with the sort of Andrew Tate kind of character of the world? Because that's quite an interesting observation of what happens when I don't know, perhaps men don't have the spaces to speak about certain things. And it's just bizarre when we're having so much progress in so many areas. That feels like a very backward movement.
Well, where there's a vacuum, where there's space, it will be filled. And the unfortunate thing is that I think there's been a growing issue with young boys and men feeling lost, not really knowing what masculinity means, in some ways even feeling shamed for being masculine or being a man. And therefore what's happened is this person has stepped in and he's provided a beacon of hope for all these people. And of course, he's not the beacon of hope anyone, well, I certainly hope that people want to have for our young men.
No,
but I think it's a wake up call. I think it is. I honestly think it's a wake up call that we must elevate. I think it's a wider conversation, but I mean, sexism in this country has been a huge issue over the years. How women have been disadvantaged in the workplace, pay gaps, and the movement of feminism. I think we all agree is a really positive thing. What we need to do is help that, while just being careful that we don't make young boys think it's bad to be a man, because actually being a man can be really important. If you think of my dad growing up and having men in your life and masculine figures, that's really important. And I think we just got to be careful that we give hope and we help channel young boys and young men as they grow up to know that actually being a man, being masculine can mean showing emotion, being vulnerable. Being masculine can be following female leadership. Being masculine can be, yes, being tough and strong, but also able to just kind of step back and say you need help. So it's kind of like helping, not saying being masculine is bad. What we want to change is what it means to be masculine. Does that make sense? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And I think we just got to be careful that I agree there's loads of toxic masculinity is a huge issue, and I agree, and I'm with you all, and I'm with everyone on it. We're all agreed. I hope most people agreed on that. But what we need to give is a good alternative. Like what does it mean to be good masculine? What does that mean? And if we can help really, channel that, then I think we can help. This is just my thought, but maybe we can help stop what we've seen with the Andrew Tate situation.
Yeah.
You can't, there's always going to be people like him out there. But what we've got to do is not give people like him the opportunity. Because there's loads. I mean, the number of young boys look up to them and think, oh, they're amazing and all this kind of stuff. And it's just really sad. Sad, isn't it?
And so it's about giving an alternative then?
I think so. I think it's helping people see a different way, like that being a man is good, and you can be a really good person and be a man and do amazing things for society. But you don't have to do that through that medium. You can have there's much healthier ways to do it. And the true thing is, when we think about like masculine and feminine, we all have a bit of both, don't we?
Of course, yeah.
And I think that's sometimes an important thing to remember. And I've got there's feminine energy that I have, there's masculine energy that I have. And you'll switch between different parts of that depending. Because if it makes sense, I mean, like my mum and my dad, but also other female influences they've all influenced my life. And I think equally, like, women have masculine energy as well. And like, I don't even know what, sometimes you think, gosh, what does that even mean? It's just like a sense of something, isn't it? I don't know. And
everyone's a bit different. You might meet more feminine men and vice versa.
Absolutely.
But as a kind of final note, I think you are an amazing example of a very healthy masculine man who's doing incredible work in the world.
That's very kind of you.
Yeah.
I say the same thing I've said before. I'm perfectly imperfect. I'm still growing, learning. I think one thing I do hope for young people, and I think and thank you. And I am doing my best, and I feel a good person, I must say. Like at certain times of my life, especially things with my brother, but other times that we've made mistakes in my life, I think you feel like I'm not a good person. But I think in an odd way, that is what it means to be a good person, when you're able to kind of sit and think, oh, I'm disappointed in myself or whatever. But I really hope for the younger generation, we learn to not judge others and ourselves so harshly. Like everyone's obsessed with being seen to be a really good person, but actually most of us are just human, and we're all doing our best, and you'll have times in your life which you're like, that you've got right, and other times you've got wrong.